Hi. This episode is slightly different from the others in that it is a recording from one of my live Q&A sessions that we held on Zoom a couple weeks ago. If you want to join one of these sessions, let me know on Instagram at Sophia_Ralston. This session is a little bit longer than usual because at the beginning we're sort of getting into it, finding our groove, but stick around, it's worth it. Or, play the episode at 1.5 speed, as you wish. I'm Sophia Ralston, and this is Electric Mind, ADHD and beyond. Enjoy. As you guys may know, I'm starting the channel Electric Mind because I'm passionate about raising awareness about ADHD, because I realize that a lot of people don't actually understand what it is, even people who have the diagnosis themselves. So there's lots of different levels of understanding. So that's why I thought it would be interesting to also hear from a crowd. Like, I think some of you are diagnosed, some of you are not, or some of you are in the process of being diagnosed. Of course, as we were talking about a lot yesterday, at the Vernissage ADHD day, ADHD also overlaps with autism quite a lot. Unfortunately, I don't know as much about autism as I do about ADHD, so feel free to ask questions about that too. If I can answer, great. Also, if you guys have a better answer than I do, please at any time feel free to just jump in. This is a conversation. So yeah, the thing that I like to say about ADHD first and foremost is that it's misnamed. Like, the fact that it's called Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder, I don't think is accurate to what it entails, because really it's an executive function disorder. It's a self-regulation disorder that affects us in every part of our lives. So does anyone want to jump in with like a first question?
Yes, maybe just as we were talking yesterday about ADHD and stuff, one thing in specific was the setting of and the influence of it on us, in the sense that, is it a disorder just because in today's society it definitely is, because we're expected to function differently, but maybe it had a purpose at some point, and I guess there are some studies that claim that. Yeah, the question then would be, is it a disorder at all, or is it the environment that doesn't allow us to use the way our executive functioning works? Because it does, but maybe just differently. Yeah, I don't know. Just maybe it would be interesting to hear some opinions of this.
Absolutely. Good question. So several things I have to say on that. So I think absolutely it did have more of a function back in the days. A lot of people talk about the sort of hunter-gatherer aspect of it, that it used to be that you have the more neurotypical people that would go collecting berries, and we would be the hunters, because of course the aspects of ADHD that we have that are positive are actually quite helpful for hunting. The fact that we can go into hyperfocus, we are hypervigilant, we sort of get distracted very quickly, but that also means that we can react quickly to if there's danger around. And we're also not, like we were also talking yesterday about, we're not risk averse, so we will just go for it, even though there's a chance that we might get killed by the tiger. We'll still go for it and hunt it. Another really interesting fact about how it works in society, which is kind of shifted in today's modern day and age, is our sleep rhythm. So for people with ADHD, we have a delayed circadian rhythm, meaning our melatonin will kick in later. So melatonin is the hormone that makes us go to sleep. So when it gets dark, that's usually when it kicks in. Whereas for us, we prefer going to bed later, like usually definitely after midnight, sort of between 2 and sometimes even 4 a.m. And we want to wake up way later, which is also why I apologize that this meeting started so early. I did that so Australian people could join, although I don't think there's any Australians here. Although, well, Higi, you're in Tokyo, so that worked out well. But yeah, and what I found really interesting about the sleep shift is it had an evolutionary value, because as a tribe, we want to be as vigilant as possible for as much of the day as possible. So, of course, you have people that prefer to go to bed earlier and wake up earlier. And then you have the people who go to bed later and wake up later. So the period of time when everyone in like the village or whatever was asleep is just like maybe 2 or 3 hours. But the rest of the time, it's like taking shifts of watching over the others, which I think is really nice. But these days, of course, if you work in an office or anywhere, really, you have a schedule, timetable, and people just decided, hey, let's all like get up at 7 a.m. because why not, and start working. And then, yeah. And so to your question about is it a disability or not, I also sort of, do you mean like the time yesterday when I answered the question from the crowd of like the society should adapt to us? Is that sort of what? Okay. So is it a disability? I personally think yes. That doesn't mean that it doesn't have its positive sides. There are a lot of really, really great things about ADHD. But I think that a lot of people that say, oh, it's not a disability, like I'm really proud of it, like society should adapt to us. I think it sort of diminishes the struggles that we face as well. And I mean, there's one aspect of work environment and just functioning in society, but also just for ourselves, like maintaining good relationships. The ADHD tax, like will in the end will pay more money because we miss paying our bills, and then we get fines or just fines for parking wrong or speeding tickets. Ugh, the amount of speeding tickets I got, I'm scared of losing my license. Um, Late library books, like all those things, or just even losing items and having to rebuy them. There's so much more money that we have to spend. Also, we have a lower life expectancy because we're more likely to have accidents. There's dietarily or just like with comorbid conditions that also affect our bodies. There's so much that adds to a lower quality of life in certain ways. And I think that needs to be taken seriously. And I think that doesn't mean that because there's a lot of negative parts, that there aren't also a lot of positive parts that you can utilize in society. Like, for example, that's why I'm a filmmaker, because every day is different. There's always novelty, there's always a challenge. I'm very interested in it. So the more passionate I am, I can go into hyperfocus and I can kind of always choose what I want to do. It's always sort of project work. So I don't need to maintain any long-term goals. So I think the key is if you're aware of what you can do well and what you can't do as well, and you adapt your life to that, I think it absolutely can work well in society. I'm sorry, that was a very roundabout way of answering your question. Did that sort of answer your question?
Yeah, well, I was more asking for a story anyhow, so I guess.
Right.
Um,
Story.
yeah, another thing was, I don't know if I like it, the dichotomy of hunter-gatherer, but what was also interesting is that apparently it appeared during a time where we started migrating, and the adaptability of people with ADHD helped people with migration and to adapt to new environments.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, now we are very much within structures, and that is an issue.
What do you mean?
What
do you mean by structures?
Kind of physical built structures and
Right.
daily structures and tax structures, or specifically the forms you have to fill out and you have to apply in time and stuff like that. It's just that the issues that I have are or become very obvious in these circumstances. And if I can be free of structures, I don't have that many issues, actually. So,
right.
But this is just my personal experience. And of course, there are comorbid things that are very obvious and real. So I didn't want to question that.
That's interesting. I actually have something to say on that with the whole structure thing. Um, because I think it's quite common. I also always think like, oh, if only there were no deadlines, I could always just arrive whenever I wanted and would be free of structure. But then I know that wouldn't work. I think ADHD is we feel like we don't want structure when in fact we need structure more than other people because something needs to hold us accountable and we need the motivation to like we can't perceive so there's tasks that are important and urgent and we can feel urgent that registers to us but importance we can do that tomorrow but then it's going to be the next day and the next day and the next day and the next day so we need to basically fake that urgency in our life. So I would argue that more structure actually benefits us. Like, for example, in school, if teachers having the possibility to have extensions, which I had in high school, and then again in uni, I don't think it helped me as much. It kind of did because I knew, hey, I could go to the teacher and say, hey, look, I just need a little bit more time on this. So I would still try and make it to the deadline but then I would just need the extra little bit of time. So, what I would actually suggest to do in school is have the teacher give you an earlier deadline than anyone else, because it doesn't matter when the deadline is, we're going to do it the day before. So, if they put the deadline maybe a week before, and then you have the opportunity to extend it until the actual deadline, I think that way it would work. I don't know if you feel the same way, like if you know what I mean. Yes, Katya, go for it. Oh, I think you muted.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes. Yeah, okay. I'm sorry, my video is a bit orange. I don't know why that's happening. I was gonna answer to that and say that I think I agree about the structure, that I tend to feel like I'm just being suffocated by the structure, but actually when I have like a day to myself, when it's like no one's forcing me to do anything, I really struggle because I don't have the external structure. But I feel like what I would have benefited from is like in university or school for someone to not say like not change the deadline, but be like, this is a different way to work that isn't just, oh, you say 3 hours a day, you just sit down and get it done, because that doesn't work for me. So the way that other people work, like go to uni or go to school, then come home, eat, then do this work for 3 hours, that doesn't work for me, because like I need some sort of reward at the end of it, like every time I do the work, to feel like it's worth doing. Otherwise, my brain literally will not focus. And no matter how many hours I sit on the work, like I won't get it done. So this is just an example of like obviously academic experience, but I feel like I would have benefited from like just learning different ways to work. And I guess because I never had this conversation with anyone about ADHD until I did the research myself online, even though I'm sure there was lots of people in my classes, like out of the hundreds of people that I studied with, I'm sure a lot of them did have ADHD, and because they were describing similar problems to myself. So yeah, I guess it's about like more I don't know, like as you said, like making the world more accessible to us in a way that also describing how we would work in different ways to do it, not just writing. Yeah. Sorry, that kind of went on a tangent. I hope you know what I meant.
No, of course. We all have ADHD. We're all going on tangents. Yeah, no, that is interesting. And I think it's a really difficult task to do as well because you want to give the freedom, but you also want to have the structure. So, do you have like an example of how you would put it in place for yourself? Like, do you just wait for the motivation to come, or will you say like, okay, I'm going to give myself this time frame and then I'm going to give myself a reward? Or
Yeah, like I would usually, I've started doing that after watching many videos on how to motivate myself or get like a big chunk of work done. I started doing it, I think, in the last year of uni, which was like 3 years ago. Before that, I had no idea what ADHD was. I just thought I was stupid, to be honest. Even though I seemed to get good grades when I actually like did stuff last minute, like I would submit my assignments always last minute. I'd always get a good grade for it. And I was like, oh my God, am I just lucky? No. So I think for me, like it works to split up the work in smaller chunks and force myself to take breaks. So like, even though I feel like, oh, I can keep going, I don't, because I know that that's like a false feeling. I will burn out at the end of this, and then I'll be like, oh, well, it doesn't make sense anymore. I don't want to do any of it. So I will split it in small chunks and have like designated breaks, and will not allow myself to keep working through it. Basically,
That's a
yeah.
really good point. But do you find that like after the break, when you start again, how does that?
It can be, yeah, it can be hard, but because I've done it a few times now, I feel like in my mind, I'm like, I know it works. Like it's a tried and tested method. Whereas what I was doing before, it often didn't work, just like sitting through until it's done. And also it's really demotivating seeing, for me personally, it was always really demotivating seeing other people who could just do it and I just couldn't do it. And for me, like if I see that, that may be like a bad personality trait, but for me personally, if I'm part of a group and if no matter how hard I try, I'm doing the worst out of everyone or I don't seem to get it, I'm like, maybe I'm in the wrong room. Like, so I'll just not want to do it at all. So maybe that's just me. I'm like, let's quit. Well, you know, let's cut my losses sort of thing. But I think doing the breaks is like personally very helpful for me.
Mm. That absolutely makes sense. I mean, also like with what you said, we have this sort of urge to just continue, and we go into hyper focus, and we're just like, we don't want to stop. And again, we just forget to do everything else. So eventually our body is going to catch up with us and realize, hey, you've not eaten in 8 hours, you haven't had any water, you haven't taken care of yourself. And absolutely, that is vital to be able to continue. I've still not found a way to healthily do that. I mean, I do often just like continue working. I know that for me, working at night really helps for some reason. And then I can also just continue straight on. I think it's also just because I know that there's no outside distractions, no one's awake, no one's texting me memes or anything. And it's just, it feels really peaceful. And yeah, but breaks is absolutely a good shout. I should do that more as well.
I feel like no one's watching at night. Like that's what it feels like to me. I'm like, no one is watching my system. No one is going to question my work methods. And I feel like something like just to finish up on what I was saying before, one of the reasons why I feel like it would be very useful for like, you know, but when you start from school or like university, for someone to actually do present these different ways of working is that when I did do that, I felt judged, or like when I saw other people do it, because the narrative often is, well, if you're not working long and hard hours, you're just not good enough. Like you're just not going to cut it. And that's just not the way that everyone works. And it is very much how you're expected to work. And the judgment does come from, you know, if it's your parents or if it's, you know, people that you work with. Yeah, so I guess more awareness around ADHD and how different brains work, I think it's very beneficial in this case.
Absolutely. And also judgment from ourselves. I mean, it's been just like drilled into us so much that I think probably we are judging ourselves harder than anyone else is judging, just because we see it from the outside and we think, oh, that's what I'm supposed to be doing. And yeah, and the thing is with us that we are very good at using our time very efficiently when it comes to it. So that's why we can start the day before and then we just like whip everything out. And then again, we still get good grades or we still manage to put in something valuable. And yeah, it just, as you said, it just works differently. And we need to, yeah, embrace our differentness, not to sound too cheesy, but yeah. Yeah, so what I wanted to say on the whole migration thing that you mentioned before, Stefan, is also what I find interesting is that I think probably 80% of the people here, like in the Zoom right now, are internationals in some shape or form. And I was also talking to a friend about this, and I think Stefan, we were talking about it yesterday too, is that me and a friend of mine, both of our families have just constantly always been moving country, and all of our family members have moved somewhere else. Like they were born one place and then half of them went to France or then Australia. And then I think some live in New Zealand and then the UK and my aunt decided to go to Holland, like from everywhere, just spread all over the place. And I think that absolutely what you said with the adaptability, but also with the chasing of novelty. So I'm not sure if you all know this, but there's the three things that motivate an ADHD person the most is either a challenge, a novelty, or when it's related to ourselves. So that's absolutely a reason also why we move a lot. And I've absolutely done that. I'll get bored of a place, or I'll be in some kind of difficult life situation. I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to move country and then all my problems are going to go away. Of course they don't. But, well, they get worse in some cases. But yeah, I wonder if you guys have any input in that as fellow internationals.
Right. I think back I'm from India, so back in India, since I had my comfort zones, since over the years I knew that where to go and where not to go, so it was relatively much easier. But when I came here, so I couldn't find the same comfort zones because obviously the people didn't know me, I didn't know them, and by the time we got to know each other, we moved on. So there were a lot of these circumstances where I really was at loss to explain myself. And for example, something like you said about novelty and a challenge. So I don't know, sometimes I feel that it just, at times it worked against me. In the sense, in 2021, I came here for a master's. I chose a dissertation topic like completely different from the class. Like it was completely different, something which today there's a lot of research is going on in Europe after 2 years. But that time the EU's AI Act was very new in its proposal, and I was really critical of it. And my supervisor, I was given an external supervisor, and he was like, you should continue this like a postgraduate paper. And then he told me that I really admire this and it's very different, but your other two examiners are not able to understand this because you have put in too much of economics and technology and law altogether. So like on one hand, you say you should be interdisciplinary. And when I do that, then, so that happened. And then again, something which was being discussed, I sought one extension, I sought another extension, and then I was 40 minutes late. Because in the end, I really messed up in the sense of, merging the files, converting it. So it was such a mess that 1 hour was, I still remember that was like horrifying for me. I was trembling for that. So despite the extensions, despite everything, I realized that, initially for the first few days, I would just be probably looking at the problem with, from different perspectives, probably reading more. Like sometimes it happens almost like opening sometimes Google and looking for something. One thing leads to the other, something more interesting. You go into that, and at the end of the day, one realizes that, okay, I'm like on something completely different. So I don't know, it just happens every time that no matter how much time I have, it's always the last minute. And if there's some technical issue or some other issue at the last minute, it's just a mess. So I don't know. I'm not sure how to deal with these things. And I have just faced these things since childhood. And when I now look back and I realize the kind of opportunities which I lost because of that 1 second, 1 minute, 1 mark, life would have been completely different. So for example, now I am not sure if I told you, I had been applying for a PhD program. The only 2 places I got positive response was from supervisors, was from Cambridge and Oxford. But then because of the delays, I couldn't manage a distinction. So the university informed me, no matter how many supervisors accept you, your application will be rejected from the automated system by the automated. Yeah. So it doesn't matter. So they were like, it doesn't matter what your proposal is. It just matters you need to have a distinction throughout. So I was like, okay, so it doesn't matter what my proposal is, what thoughts I have, but all that matters is where I got the distinction from. Had I known this, I would have gone to a private university and done things. So these are very strange. So very strange hurdles which I face. And so it doesn't matter what thoughts I have, what novelty I have, because it just goes against me. So the next time I'm trying to think differently. and this happened in almost all my papers. I took extension in all the papers, 10 papers in masters, and in every feedback I got, okay, good research, very great independent thought. Independent thought was something I got in every feedback, and that thought was used to answer questions, but I lost grades because of that. Somehow, because I was told to give a citation for independent thought. I like, how do I do that? So I mean, so those are the kind of things I feel. So so I mean, that's been my experience here. Though again, I said in India, since I was in my comfort zone, so and there were people, there were things which I could run to. So somewhere it felt slightly better. I mean, there was always, someone I could call and say, could you come around for this? I thought just having a few people around doing nothing also, or maybe not helping directly, but it somewhere helps. So those are the kind of things which I found different, like moving away to a different country or a different place. So, yeah.
That's really interesting. Thank you for sharing that. Would you say that in India, there's less of that sort of bureaucracy, sort of like these rules that they make up that don't actually make sense? Kind of like what you're describing of like the certain criterias that you need to match in papers. Do you think in India it's a bit more relaxed?
I think, no, it's different. And I think somewhere it makes it worse because in India, we have a very, very, very difficult examination system. So, for example, I mean, I'll give you an example. For example, my brother, he graduated from Calcutta University, which is one of the better universities, and he got a 62% in English. That was the record mark since the university was founded in 1800 something. So, because they don't give marks. So, here, and second, the examination system is really rigorous. Like the syllabus is massive. A lot of things which may be outdated are there, but they keep adding things. So there's no limit to the syllabus. So, I mean, those are the things which are difficult. So, so that was one thing which was difficult, to follow that examination pattern and finish those papers. So I have never finished a paper in my school life or my undergrad. So except when it comes to, so I scored higher on my submissions and I did not fare too well in my examinations. So that was something my teachers couldn't figure out, that, how have you done this here and here? So I remember one person also suspected that probably someone helped me write that paper because she couldn't figure out that, okay, this submission it's wonderful, but what happened in the exam? You haven't just finished, 20% of the paper. So, and I could never explain this. One reason why was also I myself didn't understand. So I was saying that, I mean, not that in India, the bureaucratic hurdles or other hurdles are any less. In fact, at places they may be more. But I realized that being in the difference of moving abroad, and it was just that, all these years grown up in a city, in a place, in a country. So one knows where to find support. Mm-hmm. Even if the person is not aware that I have this issue, but at least I can fall back on something or somewhere, even going to my favorite coffee shop or anywhere. So, I mean, how I figured that in Glasgow was probably going to dance Glasgow.
Yeah.
I don't know, that's just my refuge. It's just, and I find it very difficult to tell people. It's just that being there makes you feel loved, wanted. And I mean, it's a different feeling altogether. So no matter what I do, even things which I suck at, like ballet. So yeah. Yeah. So I mean, it's just easier to find support, and one has more freedom. I mean, in one's own country, one has more freedom in the sense of questioning things, or say if it was some delay by NHS. If that was in my country, I would have made a lot of ruckus about it. But here, being on a visa, I have limited rights, limited freedom. So, those are the kind of things which I think is different for me for moving to a different country. So, yeah.
That's really interesting. I mean, I have a similar experience, and that for me is always sort of like what you're saying about the familiarity and knowing where to go. That's kind of what made me realize that Switzerland is my home, because everyone would always ask me, like, because I'm like Australian, German, roots in the UK, growing up in Switzerland, everyone's like, oh, but what do you feel like the most? And I was like, I don't feel a country. But I realized that in Switzerland, in Zurich, that is absolutely the place where you can just, when you speak to people, can kind of, you kind of know how they're going to react. You have a sort of feeling, predictability about what's about to happen. And again, like knowing where to go, it does feel more secure in a way. And in Glasgow, I also struggled a lot with that. I also found that Dance Glasgow was definitely a very inclusive space, and that it was just very much like, just come in and everyone just, doesn't matter how good you are. And yeah, also I know you went to more ballet. I went like once or twice and I was like, oh God, I cannot do this. But yeah, absolutely. And I think that also when it comes to that, I don't know. In the UK, I think it's just difficult altogether.
Yeah.
Because even though I sort of like, I went to different doctors and tried to, I mean, same thing in London, like London and in Glasgow, trying to get help for ADHD was virtually impossible. Like even just getting therapy when I was doing quite badly, I was able to get, I think, 6 sessions on the NHS that could be extended to 12 sessions, but only based on depression and anxiety. And I was like, well, do you have any ADHD specialists? Because the people I'm talking to, they're like giving me homework and giving me stuff to do that doesn't really work for an ADHD brain. And I was constantly explaining my ADHD to my therapist. And they said, oh no, we don't have specialists in ADHD because it's like not severe enough. It's not bad enough to provide help, which I think we all know does not make sense at all.
Yeah.
So,
And also, I'm not sure if it's got to do with ADHD, but a sense of indecisiveness when it comes to personal things. For example, even small things, like, it's almost embarrassing to say this, but small things like getting a haircut or buying which t-shirt. So I would be in this habit of, calling people, okay, and messaging them, a friend, that, okay, this one or this one. They would just respond because they're used to me.
yeah.
But here you can't find those people, and the time differences, and obviously back in India, who's at work, who's having what issues, who's doing what. So it just, that part gets difficult when I'm stuck with something. So sometimes I spend like an hour at the store. Like for example, I went to buy these heels for the heel classes. I did few classes, and I was there for like 1.5 hours on Saucy Hall, and I tried probably everything in the shop. Took pictures, sent to people, waited for the response, and then bought. And these guys were like, 50% discount. This guy is there for like 2 hours, trying to make up his mind. So that kind of a thing. So I think that becomes easier when one is in that familiar comfort zone. So yeah,
Absolutely. Katya, do you want to jump in on that?
Yeah, I wanna, I don't know, say my own experience in that. I feel like this decision paralysis has definitely like affected me a lot, especially when it comes to obviously in day-to-day things that you're saying, like choosing something in the store, just like walking round and round, not being able to decide between things like that. But also like in a more sort of serious way, in a more like, I don't know, in a more, I guess, way that would actually affect my life, like what to do in university, or like what job to do, or like just important things like that, because like I don't know what choice to make often, and I'm like, I don't know, it's not that I'm like not confident enough to make either of the choices. It's like, which choice is going to be like perfect according to all factors. And then the problem is that like if I do make a choice that I don't get, like I don't feel like I got a reward from it, I don't feel like it worked out perfectly like I planned, I then don't want to make any choices like that again. And then I feel like I'm in this like limbo of like not making choices to actually like develop my career or like myself academically. I also don't know if that's an ADHD thing, but I definitely think that's yeah, it's been very crippling at times. Yeah.
Absolutely. I once had a panic attack in IKEA because I couldn't choose which plants to get. I mean, and I think I was calling my dad, crying like, please help me. Should I get the big plants or 2 small plants? Or I don't know what it was. But absolutely. And I think there's 2 different elements to that. And you already sort of mentioned the first of like previous experience that we've made of we made the wrong decision, and that sort of following us and then being scared going forwards to make that same sort of mistake again of like, what if I'm going to choose the wrong thing? And then our brain just catastrophizes everything and goes to the worst possible place. And then we get paralyzed and then we're like, oh my God. And the second part of that is that we struggle to prioritize. So because it's an executive function disorder, our brain can't like distinguish between two things, realizing what's more important than the other. And to me, a way how I like to visualize it is it's like two sides pulling me equally, like two ropes. And they're just, because neither is stronger than the other, otherwise I'd just go that way or that way. But because they're the equal strength, I'm just here being pulled, feeling torn and paralyzed and stuck in the middle. And there's nothing else that I can do. Go for it.
I don't know whether it's again related to this, but probably to resolve things. Sometimes when I get comfortable with something, for example, going to a particular coffee shop or food and snacks shop, and I buy the same thing again and then again, and because I think that I don't have to make choices. And a lot of times your friends would be like, I've been seeing you for all these years, you haven't tried anything else. So I find it very difficult to tell them if someone doesn't know me well, like, why I just take the same thing. And a lot of times it used to happen that I walk to the shop and the guy would make me the same strong cold coffee and give it to me without asking me what you're ordering for, because he was so used to that over the years. So I don't know whether, how these things work, but sometimes it can get really stressful trying to make a decision even for small choices. And I realized it wasn't much. It's more to do with personal choices. It's, being a lawyer, it's so easy to advise other people. And so in my profession, I would come across probably to someone who's very confident about things, and I've done well in certain ways. But so when I tell people who have known me, not through since school days, but maybe a little later, and when I tell them, okay, this is what I was diagnosed of, this is what, they know it's not possible. And because, and I think a lot of people, including myself, I'm still trying to grapple with things, but a lot of people are not really aware of ADHD. Like I think at the beginning, your opening lines were, it's like sort of a misnomer or not named properly. Because a lot of people are thinking that, it's one of those kids who look outside the window and dreaming, and that's probably it. And I try to tell them it's much more than that. And that's what I realized when I was filling up one of those forms, the initial assessment part. So I just felt that everything applies to me. And the more I read, the more I reflected back since I could ever remember. And I don't know, there's so much of lack of proper information and lack of awareness amongst people who maybe non-ADHDs also. Mm-hmm. Because somewhere, a lot of times a toxic comment also comes. Maybe it's unintentional, that, okay, you're making this up, or everyone has it. Okay, even I had it for like 6 months. I think, okay. So,
those kind of things.
Yeah, it's not like cold or COVID. You had it for like exactly. 5 days. Yeah,
absolutely. And I think it's really difficult because there is, limited research, of course. But then also, like, even for me, who I've been trying to learn more about ADHD for a really long time now, I'm also not going to gravitate to like the scientific papers because it's just so hard to read. And so I'll go to people like Dr. Russell Barkley that have a way of like explaining it in a more sort of layman's terms kind of way. But that's exactly why I also want to do the YouTube channel. And I just like want to spread more and more and more. And even just by talking to people in everyday life, and because if someone starts me on ADHD, it's hard to get me to stop. So, and I feel like I've helped a lot of people realize, oh, actually, this might be something that I have as well. And that's why I think it's absolutely essential what you say. Like, yeah, people with ADHD with the diagnosis need to know more, but also non-ADHDers need to know more so that we can also remove stigma. And yeah, there are a lot of statements, as you said too, like that are not even intended as toxic and that they're actually trying to help us, but then they don't. Like when people say, oh, I have that too, that's okay. Like it's not that bad. They're trying to make us feel better, but what they're doing is devalidating our experience. So
No, it's just like when people will say, this is, I know it's like a common joke, like it's like a meme. It's become a meme now, but I've literally had like a family member say this to me. Oh, you're not like your cousin who's like 8 years old and he's got ADHD, like, or yeah, like, no, you're not like that because like you did great at school, like, and he's funking out all his class, like he's not able to pay attention in classes, he's making so much noise. And I'm like, do you understand the internal struggle, the absolute horrors I went through just to be able to sit through a class? And it doesn't manifest the same in girls and boys or at different ages or depending on like, I don't know, your upbringing. It's not the same. And it's, I think one of the hardest things I've had like in the past year or so is that since I've realized that I have it and I feel like a lot of the tips that I read online and like, even like talking to other people who have it and have been diagnosed with it, it helps a lot, like in the way that I manage my day-to-day life. And it's helped, like, if I didn't have it, those tips probably wouldn't be like feel life-saving. You know what I mean? They wouldn't make me feel like I can finally breathe and do the things I have to do. But I feel like, as you're saying, people are trying to help who don't have it. And to them, it's like, oh, well, if I say that, I relate to that, then problem goes away. But what it does, it invalidates how you feel. And it also makes me feel like, yeah, no, I should just push myself more and be better. And then I go back to before I knew about ADHD, where I work myself to burnout, and then I literally can't do anything for days. And then I'm like, and then everyone's like, oh my God, like, what's wrong with Katia? I wonder what happened. Well, I'll tell you what happened. You told me it's normal to feel this way, and I should just not do anything about it and it'll just go away. And what I did is I worked myself until like my brain literally cannot produce anything that needs to produce for me to do even the most basic tasks. So there you go.
absolutely. Absolutely. I think, wait, I was going to say something on that, but I forgot. It's going to come back to me. Oh, yeah. Also okay, go for it, Stefan.
I could just bridge over. I just would want to hear if everyone here has burnout experiences. Like, well, I do.
I've gotten very close to burnout. I don't know if it was burnout or like related to like a re-traumatization type thing. But there was definitely a period when anytime that I would just think about working, I would start crying out of nowhere. I would just be like, and I'd have to call my teachers sobbing, like literally, I don't know what's happening to me right now, but there's just, I can't work. I don't think, because I have a few friends and family members who have been through burnout, and the way how they describe it, it wasn't quite that bad, but almost. Opening up to the room if anyone else wants to share.
Anyway, I was gonna say about the burnout. Yes, definitely. I thought that was just like a unique experience, and maybe I just wasn't good enough for the workplace. But recently, I came across an article which talked about the people in their 20s who are finding out they have ADHD who suddenly have like corporate burnout and like they can't do their jobs anymore. And I was like, I've never felt so seen because literally like for like the past year, I've woken up almost every morning thinking, I don't know how I'm going to find any dopamine to do any of this because literally like this does not excite me in the slightest. Like I feel like I'm good at my job, like I meet all my targets, but like I don't know how I do it because every day is like such a struggle to just get through and find new ways to get excited. And some days I'm literally like, I might just quit. Like every other day, I'm just like, I'm just gonna quit. This is no longer exciting or interesting or anything. But I also have struggled in the past few months to even think what I would do for work. And I feel like that's a big sign of burnout, especially like, well, when it comes to work at least. So yeah, it's currently trying to work through it. I don't really have any tips right now because I'm in the deep end, but yeah, I've definitely experienced that.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah. I think that's Right. Okay. Before we forget again, let's go.
Yeah, no, I just 2, 3 things I think at the same time. One was the question which I probably asked you on Instagram, and you sent me a very good response on work. So, I mean, like for everyone else, I'm a lawyer trying to get into the academia, but I was looking for some part-time random work. So I tried to go for some bar work, and I had never really done it before. Like, so, and on my very second day, I spilled drinks, not only on the floor, but on the guests. The guests were very nice because they're from Glasgow and you're chilled out. But after that, I started feeling that, all eyes are on me. And it's almost like, it just felt it probably just in my mind, but like everyone is conspiring to get you out of here. And it got so bad in my head that then the very next day or after 2 days, I told the guy there, the manager, that, okay, I'll be leaving in a week and they asked why. I think because I found something else. I didn't know what to say, but I really want to get out. And when I was leaving, then I felt that probably what I thought or overthought wasn't true in its entirety. So I don't know, that's one thing that sometimes it's just a mind which plays games that feel like, especially when it comes, if I get a kind of rejection from somewhere, or if I get a kind of not a very good response, or a response which I can interpret in 10 different ways, I start feeling that, okay, this is, there's something wrong here. And I keep thinking about it till I get out of it. And it sometimes feels that, okay, it's, even if the easiest of things, it may just make me feel like, okay, it's one of the wars that can't be won. So there's no point. And then I'm torn between whether to leave or whether to stay, because, there are like benefits and pros and cons both. So I don't know whether when it comes to work, is there, are there categories of work which maybe like completely filtered out for people who have ADHD?
So
yeah, kind of thing.
So like what kind of jobs that would be better for that? Yeah. So I've personally found that working in film really helped me with that, like working on set in many different roles. I know that they're often looking for also just security people that just like watch the set. I think they're called, like in Scotland, Xeon or something, Lion or something like that. When they were filming Batgirl and everything in Glasgow, we spoke to all the film students. Were like, how can we get a job here? But yeah, also just work as, if you're just looking for extra work that you can do, like to just get a little bit more money on the side. Being an extra would also be something. I think anything that gives you the ability to have a different environment every day. Because even if you are having a bad day, if the crew around you isn't great, or you somehow just feel like something is off, the next day is going to be different again. You're going to be working with different people and you can start fresh, and then you just have to get through the day. So, and even if you are on longer term projects, the longest project that I would be working with the same people for 6 months max. Usually it's like 2 or 3 months. And then only if I'm working in pre-production as well is when I would have to spend more time with them. And also in film, especially if you're doing sort of like guarding stuff, like how do you call that in English? Like setwache, is like just, yeah, making sure while they're out filming, someone needs to stay with all of the equipment, all of the cars, to just make sure, just so someone's there, you don't have to like be it, because I am not strong. If someone would attack and try and steal something, I could not shield them off. But just the fact of me being there. And I love it because I'm doing it by myself. I can multitask. I'll listen to some kind of audiobook on the side, or I don't know, do something else. And no one is there to watch me and judge me. So that works really well for me. That's like also the main thing that I know. Another thing that I quite enjoy doing is working in a call center and customer service, because as much as people can be really, really annoying, it's also just fun. In my head, I'm just making fun of them. So I'm just judging. Like I worked in London in like a sort of posh furniture company, and all these very posh London women would call, and I was just having a grand old time thinking to myself, oh my God, if your worst problem is how comfortable your sofa is on Christmas, like, yeah. Um, and again, it was sort of, I was doing my own work. I did feel a little bit judged because it was like, oh, I need to do emails at the same time and then take up the phone. And our boss would always be like, hey guys, the phone is ringing. Why is no one picking up? But it still had a challenge element. Like just working as a temp meant that I could just always switch from one job to the next. Do any of these suggestions sound like something?
Yeah, they do. It's just that, like I said, that the experience at the bar, even while leaving, I felt that I probably overthought because people, I mean, some people are good. But then it just, when it affected me, I don't know, it acted like such a trigger that my hands were really trembling while carrying even 2 glasses. So I really couldn't understand what's happening. And, so I don't know how it works, but maybe if a person is faced with the same circumstance, but if there are triggers, so I think it gets worse, because ordinarily I would be able to hold like, a number of glasses. I mean, I used to back home and back in school also, I used to just play around with glasses and cups, and back home everyone used to be scared he'll drop it. But with this, when I got thinking and I felt that everyone's looking at me, my hands were actually shaking, and I was not even confident of taking one glass in a tray. So I don't know how these triggers act, but I just realized that sometimes it's just the surroundings, or I think if there's someone to fall back on or not, or that feeling of loneliness. I think these kind of things, somewhere they aggravate things or trigger things. So, yeah.
Absolutely. I think I also sent you, I'm not sure if I covered that in the voice messages that I sent you on Instagram, about rejection sensitivity dysphoria, which is a very, very big thing that I also experienced a lot in Glasgow. Just very quickly on that, on the rejection sensitivity dysphoria, I think that's one of the things that I learned later on when it comes to ADHD, because I also didn't know that it was a part of it, and that I just thought, oh, doesn't everyone experience numbing, like intense pain throughout your entire body when you even think you might be rejected? No, that's just me. Oh, okay. But yeah, and then I realized other ADHD people have that too. And I always thought that that was linked to my childhood trauma of being bullied, and which also plays a part. So people with ADHD are more likely to have been bullied or have some kind of negative experience with social interactions, because we're so easily triggered. We're very easy to tease in that sense. We're fun to tease because we will react so strongly, and that provides entertainment. Great. Yeah, so that's absolutely an element, but it's not just that. It's also the fact that ADHDs have just received so much criticism throughout our entire lives anyway, and we're always scared of being a failure to a certain degree, I think. Not everyone with ADHD, but I think that applies to a lot of people. And yeah, and what you said as well with that, it makes the symptoms stronger. So when I was in Glasgow, usually I'm quite good at separating myself from, like, if I feel like people don't like me or something, I can sort of like just walk away from the situation. But in Glasgow, I was so like trapped into this world, into this class. And as soon as things started going a little bit pear-shaped and I realized, oh, people are starting to not like me, this is kind of what's happening, I started becoming obsessive, and I was like, oh my God, you guys have to be my friends. Like, what is happening? And I was just clinging on, and I went into survival mode. Because I was triggered and afraid of slipping back into what had happened to me in primary school. But by being afraid and by being triggered, I made the whole situation even worse. So it is just, I mean, I wish I had better advice on this. I think it is also just a matter of taking a step back. And something that we learn in CBD therapy is to think about the facts that support that thought. Like if you have a thought of, oh my God, everyone hates me, think of, or a specific person, like, okay, this person texted me this. I think that this is an attack on me. And then I write down all the facts of, well, actually, no, this person is seeking out contact with me. This person does seem to like me because of this and this and this. And then you also list the facts that support the idea that they might hate you. And then you have the two columns. I mean, you can do it in your head. You don't have to write it down. But that way you can sort of see it black on white. Wait, is it? Yes, black on white, that actually it's probably more realistic. You can come to a more realistic conclusion. Yeah, Katya, you've had your hand up for a while.
That's okay. Yeah, I was literally gonna say that what you were describing, Sarab, is yeah, it sounds like rejection sensitivity dysphoria, and I feel like it's definitely like one of the main issues that I feel like, well, one of the most unbearable I feel like sides of ADHD for me personally. Because it is, I didn't know until recently as well, maybe like in the past year, that was like a thing, and it wasn't normal to literally want to quit whatever job I was doing because somebody gave me a nasty look on the first day, or like if somebody thought I wasn't good enough, which was totally in my head. I have quit jobs before that I got on like the second or third day because I was like, the vibes are off. I feel like everyone hates me. Like, it's better to just start over. And unfortunately, it was like that. I feel like it's like that sometimes with friendships or relationships, where well, it depends on the relationship, because if it's like a very personal relationship, like my partner, I feel like I have like a much shorter tolerance to rejection because it feels like a safe place. So like I can go from 0 to feeling rejected like very quickly. Whereas if it's someone I don't know, I'm more likely to give them the benefit of the doubt. And my brain is like, not everything that everyone says is about me. You know, they're going through their own thing. But if it's my closest person, in my mind, it's like, they couldn't possibly have other things going on. Like whenever they're with me, like I'm their whole world. So trauma. But yeah, I feel like the way that I mean, it's still very much like a problem in my life. It's not like I figured it out, but I feel like the way in which I try to minimize its effect on me is by like if I feel like if I wake up and I feel like today I'm feeling like the slightest thing could make me feel rejected, I am not going to text somebody who is likely to come across as if they're rejecting me because that's just how they talk. Or I'm not likely to, if I go into work, to speak to that person, or I'm not likely to pick a conversation with my partner that could potentially leave me feeling like this. So it's like I saw this really interesting. It was like not a clock, but like a dial. You know, like when something like from green to red. And if you're feeling like really green and you feel like you have the capacity to go to orange with a conversation, you're like, okay, I can do this. It'll feel uncomfortable. But if you're already at orange because other things happened, I don't know, like sensory issues, something's going on, you woke up like wrong, and then you're at orange, and then you speak to someone and you know that you already feel like shit, and you speak to someone and then you go to red, then you go to a point where like for them it's like, I'm not sure what's going on here, like I'm not aware of how you're feeling. But for you it's like the end of the world. You're like, this person hates me, like my life is a joke. Like I don't want to be here, I want to quit this job, like I want to break up with my partner, like it's the end for everything. And then 2 hours later you're like, well, that was wild. Like, so yeah, just pick your moments maybe on when you pick certain conversations. That's definitely made a difference for me. Yeah, that would be my only advice, I think.
That's a really good point. I never thought about it that way, but that absolutely makes sense. And of course, we're also sort of more likely to, when we're already feeling bad, we're probably craving more validation. So at least that's what I did, is that then I will go into the seeking mode and then I won't get what I want, and then it makes it worse. So I'll keep that in mind.
Yeah, so I was saying that on one hand, it happens like sometimes, I may feel like the most hated person on earth or the most unloved person on earth because I got a certain expression from someone or something like that. And on the other hand, in social interactions, maybe it's, in school, college, or even after dance class or classes, people are just going somewhere and everyone assumes that the other person is just coming. So I had to actually, and once someone told me, okay, why need to come? So I had to tell them very clearly that, unless I'm specifically asked to come, I feel uninvited and like a pylon. And I'm not sure how well that was taken, but that's really how I feel a lot of times. Like, unless I'm told that please come, why don't you come, or would you like to come? I won't just assume unless someone is a really close friend of mine. So I don't know, these kind of things I really don't understand, in the sense, there's extremes, like, when someone is wanting me to come but doesn't expressly say it, I won't go there. And as I'll start thinking that why was I secluded, even though others weren't asked the same question. On the other hand, it just keeps building, and then I just keep seeing the same person again, and maybe I get an impression, or obviously when something like this happens, one comes across probably as unfriendly. So the next time people won't, approach the person the same way. So I think that some way creates a lot of social difficulties. So I don't know, that's in certain situations I found myself secluded. Yeah, so I was just saying that this kind of thing has been like constant, and I probably haven't found a way to get around it or deal with it. And most people do not really understand. So, I mean, I've walked away from places where I was supposed to be there. And sometimes, I don't know, it's got to do with ADHD or not, but sometimes I would just, even if there's a party and I just don't feel like speaking to people, I'll just be with myself somewhere. And then later I think about it, I'll think, okay, that's like too antisocial somewhere. And I really have never been able to figure out how to deal with these things. And in those circumstances, I really cannot, it's very difficult for me to have this kind of a small talk or force myself into conversations when, I'm not feeling up to it for some reason. And it's really difficult. Like, it's being torn apart in the sense of time, like after a particular age, like as an adult, I know, okay, this is wrong. But still I must do this wrong to, somewhere for my own comfort. So that's something very difficult to resolve in my own head.
I was just gonna say that definitely experienced that as well. But I think what has helped me, I mean, it's like a very, very general thing, but I think it's like a change of environment. Like, I moved from Greece, which is where I'm from, to the UK when I was 17, and I definitely feel like obviously back then I didn't know about ADHD, but I definitely feel like the change in cultural environment, like I don't know, what was good for me, because I feel like in my experience it's more acceptable in Greece to like not directly invite someone, like you can just come, like it's very like casual, and I cannot deal with it. Exactly like as you said, I need people to be very intentional with me. I need people to tell me what they want from me. Like, do you want me to come? Do you not want me to come? Like, I want it to be clear. And I think it comes a lot from also, I often talk too much, or like I often want to insert my opinion quite often, as you can see in this meeting, because like I feel like when I relate to something, I want to share my experience, because I love when other people share their experiences and make me feel like, okay, I'm not alone in this. Do you know what I mean? Like, sometimes take the lead and stuff like that. And I feel like sometimes, obviously, this is an environment that's like safe to do that, because I feel like everyone can relate to some extent to it, and there's a reason we're here. But in other social interactions where people come from all sorts of backgrounds and they might not even know what ADHD is, or they might just not know you as a person, they're not like very talkative, and they wouldn't enjoy like somebody talking a lot or like trying to be quite social with them. I'm like the opposite, so I am very social, and I find sometimes for other people that can be quite difficult to deal with. So in that situation, I'm like, I know what I can be like, so I don't just want to assume I'm invited somewhere, because in my mind I'm like, oh my God, people hate me because like I talk or like I try to be social quite a lot. So in my mind, I'm like, I want them to be intentional with inviting me. So I don't feel that rejection if I come and someone isn't like super happy to see me or something like that. But definitely like it's also a cultural thing as well. As I said, in Greece, people are very casual with that. People in the UK are more likely to directly invite you to something. I feel like I don't think I've ever been to a party and somebody showed up uninvited and everyone was happy to see them. Most of the time people are like, that's so weird. Like, it's so scandalous, that somebody would do that.
That's my worst nightmare, is like going to a party and everyone's like,
I know.
What the fuck is she doing there? I'm like, oh my God.
Literally. Oh my God. Exactly. So I feel like in that way, that's another reason why I don't think I would ever move back to Greece, because even though, as you said, Sophia, like there's still a long way to go in terms of like ADHD awareness. And like you said, like in therapy, you really struggled because the advice they were giving you was just depression and anxiety related and not actually to what you needed help with. Relatable. But I feel like people here, like from my experience, there's more of a conversation around these things, and I know it's not enough, but it's still something. Whereas like in Greece, it's very like it's very they're behind in a lot of things of like if something's going on, it's like that's your personal shame. Like you deal with it at home, like you don't talk about it in society. Like there's no such thing as like a mental health struggle, and if there is, like this is not the public's problem, kind of thing. And I feel like that's why it's one of the reasons why I feel like I was able to actually figure out what was going on with my brain when I moved to the UK, because I was like, I felt like a safe environment to do that. Yeah, obviously that's been my only experience. So there's probably a place where it's like better or faster, but for me at least, it has been quite refreshing to come here and be like, oh wow, I'm actually allowed to talk about what I feel and not feel ashamed for it. Revolutionary. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I always struggle to sort of figure out where it's better. Like when I, for example, compare Switzerland and the UK, because I feel like they're open but in different ways. So something that I found in the UK a lot is that they do like sharing and talking about their own things. Especially also something I realized in uni is generational. The way how generations speak about certain things is very, very different. So like Gen Z will be very open and vocal about all of their like traumas and suicidal thoughts and everything. And but then they do still, I feel like they judge you faster. Whereas in Switzerland, it's also hard for me to tell because in Switzerland, I'm often surrounded by other ADHD or international people. That's like my main friend group base is like international ADHD autism people. So hard to tell. But even with like if I think of the more like classical Swiss people, they are a little bit more reserved. So it takes a little bit longer to get to know them. But then when you do know them, you know where you're at. And that's what I found so difficult in the UK is that everyone's like, oh my God, you're my best friend. And then suddenly they hate the guts out of you. And it's like, what happened? Like, So that's why I moved back to Switzerland actually, is because I prefer the sort of reserved first. And then we're also, I think, more intentional about sort of like invitations. Because I wanted to say something on that as well, is I'm then always surprised by like sometimes. Wait, I need to. So moving back a step, ADHD is full of paradoxes, basically. So on the one hand, we have difficulties with reading social cues. I mean, also that might overlap with being on the spectrum. But social cues is difficult for us. We have rejection sensitivity dysphoria. We are hyper aware of everything we do and say. We know that we talk a lot, we interrupt people, we go on tangents, we overshare a lot because there's just all of this dopamine and all this stuff going on in our head, and we don't have the filter to realize what's going on. I also read somewhere that I think it takes an ADHDer, I don't know how many seconds longer to be able to interpret a facial expression. So the time that it takes for us to adapt to some kind of social cue also takes longer, which makes it more difficult. But at the same time, because we're so talkative and because we're craving this human connection, we're often also very extroverted. So we're like socially awkward extroverts. So it's this constant, at least for me, it's this painful thing of I love going out, I love talking to people, but then afterwards, or especially the next day, I just cringe about and I go over every single detail that I said the night before, and I'm like, oh my God, they must think I'm absolutely insane. And I think what I'm trying to teach myself is I'm going to attract the right people into my life. Like, when I realized, especially in Glasgow, like, oh, I'm not being invited to things, and I'd get upset about it, and until I realized, why do I so desperately want to be invited to whenever I hang out with these people, I don't feel like I can add anything to the conversation anyway. I felt like a fish out of water. So why am I so desperately trying to be a part of this? And then with other people, they'll say, oh, I'm going out or something like that. And to most people, it'd be quite obvious that they're inviting me. And I'm like, can I come? And like, am I also invited? And they're like, of course, honey, you're always invited. Like, you were never imposing. And I never know. And sometimes, and I found it really interesting, Katya, what you said as well, is that you have it more with your partner and less with other people, that you have that rejection thing. Because for me, it's the other way around in a certain way. Like for me, when I'm in a relationship,
Must be nice. How does it feel to live my dream? I'm just kidding.
I mean, like, sort of slightly different. Like, I'll also get really paranoid, and it really depends on the relationship as well. But oftentimes in a relationship, I'll be worried that they're mad at me or something. But usually, especially when the relationship starts out and it's still kind of stable, I just always assume, well, they're still with me and I know that they love me. So whatever is happening is still coming from a place of love. Whereas with strangers and other people around me, I feel more like, I don't know, I feel more, maybe this is also just linked more to my trauma. Like, I've always had difficulties with other people, like groups of people. Am I going to fit in? Are they all going to turn against me? Whereas I've had very healthy, stable relationships, like with my parents or my best friends and stuff like that. I don't know. There's also different types.
That's probably why. Sorry, I was gonna say, because obviously that's a different conversation, but I think the difference there is that you said you had stable relationship with your parents. So obviously you have something to model it by. You're like, this person's here, so they obviously love me. Like, we're gonna work things out. I can't say I've had the same experience. So for me, every time I'm with someone, I'm like, there's no way they actually love me. Like, they're just here because they're tolerating me. Like, everything I do that's wrong, it's probably gonna be the end of things. So yeah.
Yeah, I can relate. That makes a lot of sense. And absolutely, the whole trauma discussion absolutely belongs to ADHD too, because I think what are we, like 80% more likely to have experienced trauma? Something like that. Fun. Oh, there's so much more I wanted to say. Does anyone else want to jump in?
I think one of the things which we started with, that how is it moving to a different country? How does one? So I think about the UK, it's people are generally more open about something like anxiety, depression, and these kind of things. So back in India, that may be taken as differently by different sections of people. Though over the last 10 years, I think people are really talking about these things, but still there are pockets where people may judge you. So I think that was one thing in the UK that became easier. Though that's another thing, that when you call the GP or the mental health thing, the first thing they asked you, I don't know how they ask and how they expect this as an answer, that are you suicidal? And like, if someone is, do they really say that? So like, how do you so I mean, so these are differences, but in UK, the problem is just the timelines, and probably you never know. And one thing with me is, like, what I felt is I can never figure out what a person really wants or feels, because they always have the straight face and they're always polite. So it's very difficult to gauge what's there behind that face. So that's one difficulty I have here. And in that scenario, I started actually somewhere being slightly negative, that okay, the person didn't say this, so maybe they don't want me there. The person didn't say this. I mean, and then I started imagining myself in the person's shoes. Like, I would have done this, so it's just not it. So that kind of thing. So I just find ways to judge myself, beat myself up, and So yeah, that's one thing that's different here. And obviously the other thing, back being at one's own country, is that the freedom to annoy people, in the sense that if I'm mad at someone, I would say whatever I want to. And here, obviously I'll be slightly different, because there I know I have choices, but I may not have the same here. So yeah, that kind of thing. And about being the extreme, that contradiction in being social. So there'll be spaces where I'll be very social, I'll mingle a lot, I'll speak a lot. and speak like really a lot, especially when it comes to, things are like physics, law, dancing. So, I won't know where to stop, till the other person moves out. But then there'll be spaces where I'll just be quiet. I mean, people who know me, they have told me a few times, what's wrong with you? Sometimes you just go quiet. Sometimes you just life around. So, and I really find it very difficult to explain, or even myself understand sometimes. So, yeah.
Is it like because you lose focus or just because you feel too self-conscious? Like when you start going quiet.
Not really. I don't know. It's not self-conscious. It's not also lose focus. Lose focus. Yeah, what happens with me sometimes, and it's happened at very odd times. Like it's happened in court also. I was arguing a case in Delhi High Court, and the judge kept, judges grill the lawyers, so they kept asking me questions. Then the judge deviated. They started narrating some incident of when they were lawyers and how they, and so I just lost track of what's happening. And then the judge asked me something, and I was, for a moment, I was like frozen. And then I found a way to get out of it by really changing the argument and putting on something. Then he asked again that, "Counselor, you didn't answer this question." So I was like, okay. So that happens.
Good trick.
And that happens even in social interactions. Like I'm speaking to someone and I suddenly just zoom out. So those kind of things happen. And I don't know. And one more thing, I'm sorry, it's slightly disconnected, but it's again something to do with moving out of the country and something. So yesterday, 2-3 days back, I was speaking to someone, and they were like, here, in the UK, people, they just make such a big deal out of things like depression, anxiety, and I really did not know what to say. And somewhere I was getting really mad, but I just kept quiet and just moved out. Like this this group is not for me. So yeah. So there again, I don't know, about personal things. I don't know where to share, with whom to share. So because there's always that fear of being judged, and judged not maybe at the moment, but maybe after 2 days when things are not smooth. So that kind of thing. So, yeah.
It is difficult. I think it's, for me, I'm just doing trial and error kind of. Yeah, that's the sort of approach that I take, because I realized every time that I come away from a conversation and I think, did I share too much? Did I overwhelm them? Was I too loud, too talkative, or whatever, or too weird? And I'll then think to myself either the next day or when I leave the conversation, I'm like, oh my God, I should just learn to shut up. I should just stop talking, full stop. And those thoughts, as much as I could try, I know that it's not going to happen. So what I'm trying to get myself into in terms of like frame of mind is I'm just going to continue with it, like with being too much and too loud and everything. And then if people don't like it, then they can walk away, which of course I know is going to tear me apart, depending on who it is, of course. But I find that easier to think of it that way than to try and force myself into a personality or try to force myself into reading the room really well. Because then it's always, the pressure is always on me and the blame is always going to be on me of like, oh, I didn't read the room right, so I should have realized that this is not the time to overshare. There's actually a funny story, which I'm not sure if I can share online, but Figgy, you were actually there when this happened. So this was a time when, at the very end of Gimme of our high school, our English teacher invited us to his place. Sorry, I'm going to go on a bit of a tangent. Story time. Yeah, invited us to his place to do like a grill evening, and we were watching Fargo. And for the first time, we heard him speak Swiss German, because he was always like, no, I will always only speak English and you will only speak English to me. And I think it then came up at the dinner table that I had made out with the same guy as someone else in my class on the same day. Like we were like, wait, this person? Yes. Halloween this year? Like, yes. And then I think I asked her, like, did he also like bite your lip a lot? And she was like, okay, no, that's too far. But then a friend of mine said to me like, oh, I wanted more details. Like you should have shared more. Whereas someone else was like, okay, that's enough. So that's that kind of shows you like some people love it when you overshare and want every detail, and other people are like, yeah. And I think it's just about being vocal. And if you overshare, I don't think you can make anyone uncomfortable with oversharing unless it's like if you're oversharing about your trauma and it might trigger other people. I think that's where one needs to be careful. But otherwise, I think more people enjoy it than they admit it because they want to know the juice. They want to know the gossip. Go for it.
Yeah, sorry. Oh my God. Like when you were telling me that story, that felt so relatable. I have two things to say on what you said, Saurabh. So one thing is that if you ever feel like you have to be someone else or you have to try really hard to fit in into a group, obviously at work sometimes that's necessary, unfortunately, because you have to make money and you have to just get through the day and get on with it, unfortunately. But when it comes to like personal relationships, I feel like I'm proud to say that I've come to a point, I think after lockdown, so after I spent a lot of time like by myself and just figuring out who I was and stuff like that. And I feel like after lockdown, I felt like it was virtually impossible for me to fake that I was someone else anymore. Like the mask just came off completely and it's just like is what it is. I don't know. I think it's also like partially like autism as well. But I feel like yeah, I'm just like this is who I am. This is how I speak. This is how much I speak. These are the things that I talk about. Some people may feel uncomfortable by that. Obviously, as you said, trauma, Sophia, like that's different. I feel like it takes some sort of like you should warn people before you talk about it or say like if you know, especially if you know that somebody has gone through something traumatic as well. It's it's obviously good to ask beforehand and just gauge where everyone is. But I feel like you just can you hear me? Can you still hear me? Yeah, okay.
Not
Like
very
if you
well. I
just
think you're
keep
frozen. I don't know if that's just me. Oh, I think you're back. Now you
can you hear
muted.
me now?
Not very
Yeah,
well.
I think I'm back. No? Can you hear me now?
Yes, I think
No.
so.
Tell me when you
It's a
can
bit
hear me well.
delayed,
Okay, yeah, I think
but
it's
go
stabilized.
for it.
Yeah, I think it's stabilized. I just mean um, like when you start just pissing out the energy that you want to get from people, when you're just being yourself. I know that sounds really cliche, but when you just talk about the things you want to talk about, like unapologetically, I noticed that like yes, I actually lost friends because they were like, oh, like you only talk about mental health, or like maybe just ghosted me in a way. But I actually found people who gravitate towards that, who also felt that way. And I wouldn't have found them unless I actually spoke about what really matters to me. And I mean, you have to trust the process. Like, honestly, it's not going to be overnight, especially depending on the circles where you're in. I feel like it was maybe slightly easier for me because I'm in a circle of like mostly young women who are often more likely to talk about their mental health because there's less of a stigma thing for women to talk about their mental health than men, perhaps, especially depending on the cultural background. Um, yeah, I think that's what I was gonna say. And also like a quick note on what you said before about sometimes like zoning out when people are talking to you. I feel like I've now talked to like my mum and my partner. I think these are the two people that I've talked to the most about it. And I've come to a place where I'm so comfortable with them that sometimes if they're given, especially if we were talking on the phone and I can't actually like I don't have like I can't see their face and like, I literally just have to listen to their voice. Oh my God, like I'm zoning out and I'm like, I will literally be like, I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm sorry. Like you're giving me too much verbal instructions. Like I cannot follow. Like we need to talk about this in person. Like my brain can literally not. I'm like, this is just words to me now. This means nothing. And I feel like when you open up sometimes to people about it, then they're less likely to be offended or they're more likely to present information to you in a way in which it would be more, I don't know, tolerable. That's just my experience.
Yeah,
I'm sorry, that was so many words.
Oh no, not at all. Yeah, we need subtitles in real life. That should be a thing. They should just like float around in space so we can just read. And we should be able to just pause and rewind. I actually, with my ex-boyfriend, we came up with sort of code words for ADHD, like whenever I needed something. And I recommend this to anyone, like with a partner, or even just with a friend or parents. If you have code words for certain situations, then it sort of strengthens the bond. And I think it avoids like having to use too many words all the time, or potentially even like in a fight, you have these words because you care about each other. So that sort of strengthens the bond. And like examples of this is, for example, with my ex, we had rewind. So I would just say rewind, and that means he needs to go back 2 sentences. Usually he couldn't remember what he was saying, but at least like I told him, sorry, basically the full sentence would be, I'm so sorry, I lost focus because I have ADHD. Would you mind rewinding the last 2 sentences that you said? But that takes a long time to say. So I just say rewind. Sounds a bit rude, but we know it's a code word. Same thing, we had freeze, meaning I am stuck in decision paralysis and I need you to make this choice for me. Like no matter if it's choosing what we're going to have for dinner tonight, which sandwich I should pick, or just anything, like the little things that are really difficult to decide. And that would be, even though he didn't like making decisions either, at least he just knew, okay, he just has to say something. We also had other ones, but we never used them. Like, I think flower pot was supposed to be, flower pot was like, I'm sorry, I need to interrupt you right now. Otherwise, I'm going to forget what I wanted to say. Like, I don't want to be rude, but I'm just going to go for it.
I would use it the most. This is like the most common experience for me. I'm like, someone will be talking to me and I'm like, this is why, by the way, I'm so sorry. I don't mean to interrupt anyone when I raise my hand. I just do it because I'm like, if I don't record now that I wanted to say something, like I will forget.
I think like on Zoom, that's absolutely like normal to do it in that way. But I sometimes find myself in conversations in real life where I'm just like, because I know I want to say something, and I'm also so hyper aware of interrupting people that I find that for some people it comes so naturally. They'll be in a conversation and people will just continue talking and there's never a gap in the conversation. And I'm waiting for that moment, like when is it socially acceptable to come in? And then I see other people cutting them off, but in a way where it just works. It's magic to me. I don't know how people do it. And that's why I also do the like hand raise thing. And it feels really rude because I'm like, attention. But of course, that's not what it is. I think one last code word that we had that we also never used was, I'm sorry, but you were talking to me about something and the subject doesn't give me enough dopamine, so I can't pay attention to you. Do you mind if we switch topic? I love you and I want to hear about your life, but also my brain is just not taking in that information. So error message. I don't think we ever used that one just because somehow it did still feel too rude to use in terms of like, you're boring me, like shut up please. But yeah.
I would just say like I don't sorry, I'm sorry to interrupt. I was just gonna say that I would just say I use that one quite often. As I said, like I do that with like my mom and my boyfriend when we talk on the phone. I'll just say like I'm sorry, like I'm really trying to pay attention, but like I'm just like my brain is not capable of this right now. Can I call you back? Or like can I bring this up? Because like I will remember, because in my brain it's like an unfinished task. Like it'll sit there. So I'm like, I'll bring it up to you when it feels urgent enough for me to get this information. That makes sense.
I was saying that sometimes I tend to overshare when I'm very passionate about something, maybe a subject, a piece of literature, an author, dance or something. But sometimes it's just that I am talking too much because I don't want to be judged. So I want to put all facts in place. That this person should know all this also. Otherwise, this isolated fact, the person may think that I am like this, but I should give them the circumstance. So I keep talking, then I just in the end, and that's what happened. Like last year, I was referred by the GP to this therapy, and I went for like it was supposed to be 4 days, and under only certain circumstances they would extend to 8 or 12, and I spoke so much. And after the end of the first session, so I told the therapist, okay, I was here for this, I'm sorry. I think then she encouraged me that, no, it's all right. It's just, you're just here for therapy. So it's not because of X or Y, it's just therapy. So, and then over the next 4 days, I kept speaking. And then she extended the session. And that's when I also realized a lot of things came. Because when I kept speaking, I thought of things. And because I was trying to explain this person, I thought that, this person should know everything. Because if I just give this picture, this bit of the picture, and if she misses this out, so, so I kept speaking, and I just surprised myself also, because a lot of things I thought I have forgotten. And I kept coming with things, just trying to explain. And then I also told her then later that, I was diagnosed with so-and-so. That's all right. And even for my initial assessment, which was just few pages of a form, I actually added about 7 to 10 pages because I told the mental health nurse that, I really can't understand this question. This can't be answered without in this smaller space. And that's one of the reasons why back in school, few papers I wasn't able to complete was because I just wrote a lot in certain sections. Like sometimes we had limited space, so I would write on the sides, and my lines would go. So I don't know, just this oversharing is also somewhere I keep thinking that maybe the other person is judging me, or may judge me in certain circumstances, probably because I've had that experience before. For example, we're talking about not feeling invited unless being told expressly. So what that resulted in was probably I was after a few times, the group of people start feeling that this guy just want to come along. So at the end of the day, you feel isolated. So I don't know. So these are the reasons why probably I over-explain sometimes also. I mean, like, for example, and it's just that in the process, we may find the right people, which may be really helpful in the sense, like a lot of times, after dance class also, I tend to speak to an instructor and I forget that they have a life or kids waiting at home. So I keep going on and on and on and on, but they really indulge, and it's just probably that's really helpful. But at times it's not. So sometimes it's difficult to figure out, and sometimes I feel bad that, okay, I shared this with this person and I shouldn't have, because we won't be in touch, or maybe that person knows someone else and they would share this with that person. So it just doesn't give a right. So it just too much of thinking going on in the head also while I'm oversharing. Yeah.
There's so many nuances to that. Absolutely. I think I also always oversharing, but also over explaining, which you touched on, as in, or well, both of you touched on, in terms of like explaining to other people, like, hey, this is why I'm like this, sort of like a big disclaimer of like, I am going to talk too much. Please tell me to shut up. I feel like we offer ourselves a lot in terms of, please tell me if this is too much and so on, because we're people pleasers and we're afraid of rejection. So we want to make other people as comfortable as possible to receive that input. And there are so many things I wanted to touch on. I hope I'll still remember all of them. So, for example, what happened to me in Glasgow is, because I feel like I'm quite good at communicating in a way, as in, like, I'm not afraid of confrontation. I'm afraid of rejection, but I want to just sort out our problems. So there was this one circumstance where I was getting weird vibes from this one person, and I took them aside and I was like, hey, I'm sort of noticing that, like, you might not like me, or like, because there was this thing that happened and this thing and everything, and am I just reading this wrong, or what's going on? And I just wanted to open up. I was actually basically saying, like, please tell me everything that's wrong with me so I can change and you will like me, which of course is like not how the world works. But I thought I was being very vulnerable and just offering an opportunity to talk about things. And she was like, oh, no, it's totally fine. Like, no, that's all these situations, total misunderstanding. And then I hear that apparently behind my back, she then went on to say, oh, Sophia did this. Like, she pulled me aside and she did this and this and this. And no, she accused me of doing this and this and this. And I'm like, I didn't accuse you of anything. I noticed these things. And that's why I thought we should have a conversation. And I think in the end, in the end, like I never spoke to her directly about it. I think I at one point texted her saying like, I'm so sorry, I didn't want you to feel this way. I think eventually she sort of realized how I meant it, and then it was okay again. But there were so many situations like this in Glasgow. I feel like I just went on a complete, where was I going with this? People pleasing and over explaining. Yeah, and I think it can come across. I think some people don't know how to deal with it, as in like they don't understand why we're doing it, and they might misinterpret what we're saying. And I think we're also constantly afraid of being misunderstood, so we'll over explain ourselves even more to make sure that that's not going to happen, because we want to do anything to avoid rejection. Yeah, I was going to say other things.
Yeah, in fact, that just reminds me, when you said misunderstood, I used to joke about this with friends that if I have to ever write an autobiography, it'll be probably incomplete works of misunderstood sorrow, because I just feel that everything is incomplete. It's just, and everyone's misunderstanding me all the time. In fact, if I was in your place when you said that you took the person aside and told them that so and so, I would have constantly, it would have been at the back of mind. I mean, I would be wanting to take that person and to ask them and know, why the person doesn't like me. I mean, what's so dislikable about me. But at the same time, maybe later I would feel that, okay, this person would have found me so weird that who does that, take a person aside. And, because a lot of people I think that would actually have that kind of a thing in their head that, who does this? So I would always be in the constant thing of being judged. That maybe somewhere right now that person is saying that, this person is so weird. That person took me around and, right.
Sorry. Yeah. Bye. Yeah.
And about
sorry, I lost track now.
Confrontation. I'm sorry.
Can you rewind 2 sentences?
Oh, sorry. Okay. No. The other thing you said about being confrontational. Mm-hmm. So I started my law practice with this person, with this very senior person who's now a judge in the High Court. And for some reason, I was never scared. And I was like overconfident about things. And I was also in a different city from where I grew up, or, where my peers, my school friends wouldn't be there. So they had absolutely different picture of me. So I came across this person who's overconfident and with a very bad attitude and who says whatever comes to his head. So he used to send me to these very senior judges to argue matters, because he used to think that, okay, this guy is not scared. And probably that's why a lot of people, like even in the UK, they have 2 years of training and so on and so forth. So the day I got registered, I started arguing matters the very next day, because this guy was confident that he can speak. And in that process, a lot of times I annoyed a lot of judges. There was this judge who was actually on the verge of imposing cost on me as a counsel, because he said that you're not maintaining the decorum of the court. And I was just a little too justice oriented. I don't know whether this with ADHD,
yes.
Figured that out from that initial form which I filled. And then I realized I was really more passionate about these cases which were either pro bono or where I wasn't getting paid much, instead of these corporate matters which I got paid a lot. But I was more invested in those small things, because I knew that, okay, that poor person should not suffer that kind of injustice. Mm-hmm. So, and that's the reason why I never joined a high-paying company or a firm. I just had my independent practice, because I could choose, and somewhere I felt that it would be very difficult for me to work at an organization and follow instructions. Is there a necessary or otherwise a connection between autism, dyslexia, and ADHD? This is because back in India, since I was in the profession, so I really didn't want to venture out to figure things out somewhere. Over the years, I have just found my ways, so it's just going all right. But when I came here and I just started, I came back to education after a few years, and I realized that everything is delayed. I'm not able to complete things, and then a lot of things kept coming back to me. And once someone who knew me since very younger school days, so they compared me with a kid in one of the Indian movies made about this child who had dyslexia. So, these things happened, and I I got referred to the GP and the mental health nurse and the university counseling services. They said probably it's dyslexia. They asked me to take certain assessments, and I scored very high. And I would have scored much higher a few years back. So I just want to know what's the connection. Though after that, they were like, your course is coming to an end, so the university can't sponsor your fee, which is about £500. And then later I was like, okay, that's so I just want to know, is there a connect between dyslexia, autism, and ADHD? And is it there's a necessary connect, or is just that they may be overlapping?
So they're not necessarily connected. I have to say I'm not 100% sure, but from what I do know is I think a lot of dyslexia and autism it's sort of like a Venn diagram where there's a lot of overlapping symptoms. So for example, I also that's how I got to my diagnosis is it took me a really long time to be able to read in class. Like when I'd have to read out a piece of paper or whatever, they realized, oh, Sophia's taking a really long time. Like this isn't normal. So they sent me to a speech therapist, I think. And in Switzerland, it's called logopedie. I don't know if that's what that is exactly in English, but yeah. And I think then she realized, oh, I think Sophia has ADHD, and that's how I got to that. So it's because it looks very. I always say that I'm dyslexic. I'm not actually dyslexic, but it's just easier to explain to people, hey, I'm dyslexic, because everyone knows that means I can't read as well. But what actually happens for me, because I'm not sure if this is correct, but I was told that dyslexia is that all the letters sort of start jumbling up and that you can't like read it properly. It's just really difficult to like get the word in to the brain kind of thing. Whereas for me, it's more like I'll struggle with that, but also more just paying attention to what the words are and processing it. So it's like more of a processing disorder, and then just losing track, getting distracted, having to start again, and then reading a paragraph, having to go back even higher up. And stuff like that, I think can look very similar. So that's why I didn't like reading for a long time. I know that some ADHDers have sort of trained themselves to read really well. And there's also such a thing as bionic reading, if that's something that you struggle with, where I've still not figured it out. It's a shame that Katya's not here anymore because I think she figured it out. We were texting about this. There's an app that you can install on Chrome, I think, where it highlights like the first few letters of the word are like in bold, and then the rest of the text is normal. And it's so much easier to read because it guides your eyes where you need to focus on. I'll send you something if I find it again. With autism, I think it's similar where a lot of the things a lot of the symptoms can look very similar. For example, not understanding social cues as well. I don't know. I think I might be on the spectrum, but again, I don't know. Just recently when I told my therapist, like, I think I might be on the spectrum, she was like, she didn't say anything, but there was like a sort of nod there. And I'm like, okay. Because she also has both ADD and, well, an attentive type of ADHD and autism. So I'm guessing that she knows. I don't know if there's a genetic component in it, though. Like when it comes to the science of how our brains work. I mean, with ADHD, you are, I think, also up to like 80% more likely to have a comorbid disorder. So be that depression or anxiety or OCD or autism or all of the above. But I don't know why. I'd have to look that up to give you a better answer. Is that like kind of answer your question?
In fact, about the reading thing, like initially I had this problem with reading, like where I used to lose track and I used to go to the beginning of the page, and after a while it got annoying, so I kept it aside. But then, like in my family, like everyone's like very well read. I'm like the black sheep of the family. So then I actually started putting in a lot of effort and started reading stuff which probably appealed to me. So instead of say Victorian literature, I focused more on something like George Bernard Shaw, which is like wit, humor, and things like that. So I realized that within a month and a half, I finished all his works. And for me, having history of not reading, I mean, not being very good with reading, so that really helped. And then I realized I started picking up things which would really interest me or which would really annoy me. So I could really read those kind of things. But sometimes it just comes back. I'll start reading something and I lose track. It keeps happening intermittently, but other than that, like in profession, I read judgments. We read a lot of judgments. We actually skim through a lot of things. So a lot of judgments have these head notes to provide a guidance of things before you get actually into the main text. So I think something like that really helps. So I can really skim through the, even on 100-page judgments like very quickly. But sometimes, which especially I have problems sometimes with fiction, which is written in a very roundabout manner. So that kind of thing. So for example, I'll find someone like Hemingway very easy to read. And but some fiction, I just really have to go back and come back. I mean, I remember back in junior school, Enid Blyton was such a treat. So,
yeah, no, for me too. For me, it also depends on the style on how it's written. But I also, because especially in like sort of fantasy sci-fi books, if there's new names coming up, then I can't remember. That's why I prefer film and television, because I have the visual association. But in books, I'm like, wait, this person, did they already explain who this is? Or like, and then I get lost. And yeah, and for me, I just need to be very, very invested. So I think the only fictional books that I read out of my own volition, more or less, that I enjoyed reading were Harry Potter and Hunger Games. But with Harry Potter, I'd already seen all the films. And with Hunger Games, it was just written in a way that I always watched it. I always read the book before the film came out, but like just. So I read the first book after the first film came out, and then read the second book. Then the second film came out, the third, and so on. I was going somewhere with this. Hang on. Yeah, I think it is absolutely. I also weirdly, I have less problem with. I prefer reading nonfiction than fiction because it's also usually about something that does interest me. And then I can sort of go in a deep dive but then I also might get bored at some point. But something that I've discovered that really helps me is ChatGPT. I will just, especially for sort of more scientific things, I'll just copy paste the text and I'm like, tell me what's going on here. Give me the most vital information and summarize it and tell me, like, dumb it down. Like, tell me in layman's terms. And then I can still ask more questions. And I don't know how accurate it is, but it helps me a lot. So I'm excited about like AI integration for ADHD.
Yeah, with fiction, it's like if I can imagine while reading things, like I can imagine the entire things in my head, so it becomes a very easy read. And otherwise, non-fiction is much easier than like I can probably read science and philosophy more than fiction.
Yeah. I don't know about philosophy. I think because in school, I remember we read a philosophy book called Sophie's World. Also, do you have it? Oh, nice. Amazing.
Yeah. I just I mean, a few years back, I think about a decade back, I got my hands on it, but then I lost my copy. I don't know what happened. I forgot about it. So just a few days back, I went to this secondhand bookstore in West End, Walter and Rushu.
Oh, it's the one with the
cat also.
Yeah, I know which one.
So I just found this. I got this from there.
Yeah, nice. I can't remember much from it. I remember enjoying. Well, actually, so Christina and I both went to high school together, so she also read it.
Okay.
I don't know if she's even still here or not, but yeah, no, I remember really liking it that we had philosophy in class, that we were talking about it, but I hated the story in between, like the relationship of like the guiding figure and taking, I think, was it Sophie that he'd like take on the adventures? I would usually skip those parts and just go to the philosophy bit because that's where like all the interesting stuff came. I don't know, but Also in school, I was just struggling with everything. So I think I might have just Googled like, okay, what did this philosopher say so that I'm prepared for class, but that was about it. But yeah, I should read
No,
it again.
I know. I mean, somewhere technology it really helps in the sense all the typographical errors. Word document just shows you so much that it's just very helpful. Otherwise, I mean, I wish I had an option in school to write on Word and submit, but we had all written exams, so it was a disaster.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
That actually reminds me about something that you said at the very beginning on submitting things on time.
Yeah.
So a little trick, which you might have already tried, but something that I sometimes do, sometimes don't, is I will write down like step for step what is involved in submitting it. Like, for example, technical difficulties, like anything that could happen and how much time it would take to resolve it. And then I add 15 minutes because I'm probably going to underestimate the amount of time that it's going to take. Even if it's something as like, okay, I need to wake up this day and submit it. So when I wake up, I know that I still need to shower and eat and somehow get my head together. So I try and map it all out. And people say that the more you do it, the more you sort of get used to estimating time. I found that it helped, but then I also wasn't consistent enough to continue doing it. But maybe if there's like an important deadline, that might be a trick of like setting yourself maybe your own deadline before and then mapping out like all of the different things that could go wrong, if that makes sense. Sort of, yeah.
I mean, I've tried doing that few times, but I do it few times, but then just not consistent enough. So it just,
yeah.
And at the last minute, something or the other invariably goes wrong. So
yeah, difficult. The most consistent thing about ADHD is that we're always inconsistent. Because I did get some questions from people who couldn't make it to the Zoom. So if you're still wanting to hang around for a bit, I might just go through those questions. So the question is, how does ADHD manifest itself when it comes to focus and concentration? And why sometimes it seems like we're really scattered and all over the place, but then sometimes we're not. So I guess it's quite to just have a simple explanation, because I believe that the person who asked this question doesn't have ADHD themselves, is that we kind of covered it before in terms of we can concentrate on what we find interesting and then everything works really well.
I think one more thing.
Yeah.
One thing you started the talk by was how it's a misnomer, how ADHD shouldn't be called ADHD but something else. Mm-hmm. So I think a lot of people confuse it for attention deficit at all times. But like you said, it's just that what we like, whatever gives us those kicks, and we are able to invest more time, energy, and tend to that rather than something which doesn't interest us. So that kind of a thing. And then in the process, we also start judging ourselves. It makes things worse. So I think it's somewhere the answer lies there, that it's more of an attention regulatory disorder than deficit disorder. So
absolutely. And it has to do with the amount of dopamine that's in our brain and the way that our neuro pathways just don't send the information and the dopamine through as it does in a neurotypical brain. So basically, if something is giving us dopamine, if we do enjoy something, then our executive function is working and running and almost going in overdrive mode. Then we're like actually above average in attention holding. But if it doesn't stimulate us enough, there is just not enough juice and power to stimulate focus. So like basically saying the same thing you're saying, but in like more scientific words. I'm not sure if that's the exact, I'm sure that there's a lot more to be said about that, but absolutely. And I think that's also why so many people are undiagnosed and get missed and don't realize that they have ADHD until into their adult years, because they're like, oh, but I was good in school, but I can pay attention sometimes. It's just all the other stuff. Yeah, absolutely. Which is why awareness is so important.
Yeah, that reminds me of one of those parent-teachers meeting in school, and the teachers were like, the parent would come, like, they really couldn't explain what happened to the grades. But but if there was any opportunity, I got it. But they really couldn't understand. Probably a lot of them didn't understand themselves. So they would always say that, okay, he's probably distracted. He's participating in too many activities. He's going for cricket. He's going for music. He's going for creative writing. He's going for fests, and probably he should focus more on studies. So then that kind of talk. And deep inside, I knew how much I was doing, how much effort I was putting, and it's just like one of the things which I mean, speaking out loud, I think that, will this ever end? In the sense, the heaps of rejections and losses, which in the first place shouldn't have been there, because they should, if taking into account a person's skills and abilities, or those kind of losses or those kind of misses shouldn't have been there. But you tend to miss out so much, and over a period of time, it's a lot. So, and then that ultimate 1 or 2 victories,
Sorry,
they
say
make
that
you
again?
happy. And then ultimate 1 or 2 victories make you happy, but at the end of the day, you feel like a failure because of not that you have lost something, but because of probably you have missed things which you shouldn't have missed.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we often forget that one can grieve those times as well, like grieving what we have missed out on because of a lack of information or other people's responses, and the way how we were dependent on other people, and what consequences that had for us. Absolutely. And especially teachers, I think it's so vital that they are educated better on this. And I think it is slowly coming. So I am sort of hopeful for the future, hoping that in the next generations, it's going to get better. I mean, one person who sadly couldn't join today, she's a teacher, I believe, and she sort of realized I'm talking a lot about ADHD on social media, and she started asking me questions. And since then, we've sort of had a back and forth a lot. And I love how interested she is, and she's going to research different things and is asking me like, hi, I have this kid with ADHD and I don't know how to help her. What can I do? That just shows so much compassion. And I know that with my teacher in primary school, for example, I later on went back to ask, like, I shot my first film there. And I think I also did an interview with her. And she said, "Oh, I mean, I knew you had ADHD, but I thought you were just being that way to annoy me." And I'm like, what about me gives, oh, that reminds me of another thing I wanted to tap on. Um, yeah, I felt like, why would you think that I'm the kind of person that wants to annoy you? She knew that I was being bullied. She knew that I felt really uncomfortable and that I would always try really, really hard. I was never rude. But then things like rocking with my chair, or having my phone on me, coming too late, and just speaking to someone next to me, that she saw that as I was doing that on purpose is just, yeah, that just shouldn't be the case. And then also in high school, there was, I think my French teacher didn't like me very much. And basically I got a Nachteilsausgleich. How do you say that? Like a disadvantage compensation thing. Like, do you know it?
Disability disadvantage compensation. I think that's what ETH called it, but I'm not sure anymore.
Say that again. Disability
disadvantage compensation, I believe.
Disadvantage compensation. That makes sense. That literally translates to
I'm
Nachteilsausgleich.
I'm not entirely sure anymore because it's been some years since I got mine, so I can't remember exactly.
No worries at all. It's probably also different in every country and in every school.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I got mine in and good to know that you got yours in uni. That's really great, because a lot of people struggle to get one. And I got mine in high school because I realized I'm just not going to make it through otherwise. And one of my teachers, didn't like the fact that I was getting this. So what I got, for example, is 10 minutes extra on exams. And what he did is he gave everyone 10 minutes extra on exams. And so the bell would ring, he wouldn't ask people to hand in their paper. And then 10 minutes later, you'd go around and collect them all. And I would say, no, I now get 10 minutes extra. And he's like, no, you did. And I'm like, but that's not the point. It's not about having more time. It's about that every exam is based on comparing to your peers. And if I'm being compared with neurotypical people, then you have to give me some kind of compensation for the fact that I am not able to study as well, that I can't concentrate during the tests and all of this, which you were making invalid. Like it doesn't work. I think we all know what I mean. I just always find it. And this is where the whole injustice thing comes in. Like I was so mad at him, not because of me, but more about like, how does this make sense to you? And I get so riled up. And so that's a very big thing with ADHD, what you mentioned before of like the feeling of injustice. I think it will never end completely, but I think we're getting there. It's a short answer. Right.
Yeah.
Also, I mean, this is something which is slightly technical, but I come across this column on a lot of forms for universities or jobs that do you consider yourself to have any disability? So I have always this thing in mind that, what does the question entail in the sense, do you consider yourself? Doesn't mean a diagnosis, or doesn't mean that you're taking some kind of support, or just that I just figured out myself, which will also be valid in a lot of circumstances. So.
Yeah, I think it really depends on the situation. Like, for example, in the UK, I know they always ask this in like every single form. Like, even if you're going to an event, you're buying tickets for something, it's always like, but are you disabled? It's so I stopped at the beginning. I did always put down as like ADHD, but I realized that the reason why they ask it is because they want to know if they need to adapt for you. Like, for example, if you're in a wheelchair, they're going to have to make sure that it's accessible for you. So, and depending on what it is, like for uni, I did put it down, although I know that other people in the class deliberately didn't.
Right.
Like put down autism, for example, because they were afraid of what that would mean for their application. They thought that they might not even get into the uni based on that. I don't know if that would be true. I mean, he got in, but yeah, and for uni, I would put it down because I know, hey, if you do have something that can help me in uni, that would be great. But if I'm going to a concert, there's nothing that you have to do for me to help me. But just more in sort of philosophical terms, I would say that it's a disability, but it's yeah. I think, did I touch on this at the beginning? I can't remember, of like all the things that it does bring with it, like the ADHD tax and lower life expectancy, accidents, risk aversion. Like, for example, I once had an STD because I am not good enough at being consequent with protection. Stuff like that. I don't have it anymore, just disclaimer. But there's so many things like that we don't even think about. And I think I like to call it a disability so that people take it seriously. Because if it's just a personality trait, it puts the blame on us when we actually have our brain works differently. Doesn't mean that there's not advantages. Like blind people can often hear better. Like there's often with some kind of lack in one area, you have an advantage in another area. So that is also very, very valuable. But that doesn't take away from the fact that I see it as a disability. How do you see it?
I actually, before answering one of the questions, I explored the law and under Equalities Act of 2010. If you could just give me like 10 seconds, because as per that definition, it should be. Yes, it's it's just given, but you are disabled under the Equalities Act if you have a physical or mental impairment that has a substantial and long-term negative effect on your ability to do normal day activities. So I think it clearly squarely falls. So, and especially for people who have experienced it, they would obviously say yes. Though there'll be that category of people who take it as near attention deficit, like a schoolboy looking out of the window kind of a thing, or daydreaming. So, but yeah, I think the more I look into it, especially after filling in that initial form and the later forms, the more I reflected on things which even I, for a very long time, kept blaming on, okay, I was distracted. I could have worked more, though a day has 24 hours. And I mean, maybe the teachers didn't understand that, but I was distracted by other things. But I did put in a lot of effort when it came to my studies. It's just that the execution didn't go well. I mean, I couldn't complete a paper. So if I didn't attempt 15, 20 marks of the paper, so I didn't expect much. So that kind of a thing. So, and there was something else. So yeah. So I mean, in case of employment, I would be slightly skeptical in the sense, I wouldn't know really whether to give it or not, because I have seen at places, it's because these acts, unfortunately, in UK, though people speak openly about these things, but somewhere I think these legislations, they give way to a lot of tokenism. That I want a disabled person in my organization, I want an African person in my organization, I want an Asian person in my organization. That's it. What work they get, what career opportunities they get, that's a different thing. And I've worked few places in the UK and I have seen that. So they would be very kind to them, but that kindness comes with a cost. So one, that, and second, when it comes to applying for universities or scholarships, I mean, I have a deadline to apply for tomorrow. So I fooled myself into believing the deadline was last week. So I think just 1 hour of work is still left. So yeah. So there's the question that whether do you consider yourself as disabled? So now that reminded me of the instance you quoted of your French examination, that people who have gone through different circumstances cannot really be treated in the same manner. Otherwise, it will be unfair to the person who has gone through adverse circumstances. So I was just wondering whether should I say yes or no? So I was just a little confused that when they say, do you consider yourself, that gives a lot of room to a lot of liberty.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, that's the big difference between equality and equity. And a lot of people have very different opinions on it. It's like same thing with feminism, where I believe in equity in terms of, for example, very random example, but the reason why there's always a queue at the ladies' toilets and not at the men's is because the way how our fashion works and the way how we pee is different. And it is faster for a man to just go to a urinal and then walk right out again. Whereas for women, we need to go into the cubicle, take off whatever layers we have, sit down. It's like a whole thing. So theoretically, equality would be the exact same amount of toilets in each stall. But equity, which I think would be fairer, is to actually build larger toilets, more toilets for women, so that the amount of time of waiting is different. I mean, also, I have no shame. If I'm in a club and I need the loo, I will go to the men's, because I'm like, I will avert my eyes, like, guys, careful, woman coming in, but I need a pee and this isn't fair. So, and this applies in a lot of different aspects. And same thing with ADHD. And I think a lot of people are like, no, I want to be treated 100% equal. I don't want to have, and I even used that argument for a while, even in high school. For the longest time, I didn't want to have that disability disadvantage compensation, because I wanted to say, like, no, there's nothing wrong with me. I can prove that I can do this, till I realized that I couldn't. And it's also difficult to find the exact things that will work, because something that they did to try and help me was put me in a separate room so I wouldn't be distracted from the other people in the class. But that actually made it worse for me, because when I'm in the class, I have the peer pressure, I have the other people around me to remind me, hey, I'm on a test. If I'm in a different room, my thoughts are going to wander. I'm going to forget what I'm doing. I'm going to be distracted by my own thoughts, by my own breathing. I get so in my head. But in a class it somehow worked better. But how do you explain that to someone who's trying to help you and they think, oh, well, ADHD means you get distracted? It's very difficult to demand or to ask for what you need. And I think that's also similarly in the workplace. Like when I apply for a job, I won't say, but by the way, I have ADHD. Like I found it really interesting. I think when I once had an extra coming onto set and I'm in charge of coordinating them, I think he then wrote to me saying like, oh, but just so you know, I have Asperger's syndrome. And I'm like, okay, do you need any help from us? And he was like, no, just want to let you know. And I'm like, that's great. I mean, but also I won't have anything, like I won't have a problem with that. But also he didn't need to tell us that because it's not going to affect his work. Whereas if I know, I will actively look for jobs that I know will work for me. And then once I'm at work, I might mention, hey, I have ADHD. So would it be okay if I had more flexible hours, or if I went to another room to work, or if I listened to music, or I don't know what? Then I find it valuable. But also, again, in Switzerland, I find it a bit easier. And also in the film industry, I think there's less opportunity for judgment. I don't know what it's like in, for example, the IT or business world, or law world. I think that might be a bit more problematic.
Yeah. Because we have like a lot of deadlines and timelines and these kind of things. So the minute if I tell someone, they'll be like, okay, this will be like a disaster.
Mm-hmm.
Though my experience was, I interned, like when I was doing my LLB, I interned for 2 years with the same person. And then I started working with him. And somewhere probably he understood these things. I'm just guessing because he became very accommodating. And his wife had great interest in psychology and these kind of things. So somewhere, because a few things when I look back, he would always give me the most complicated things. And a few times he would tell me also, sorry, you increase my blood pressure because I'm not sure that whether you'll be there on time. So he would actually tell me that when you reach court, you click a picture and send it to me. So he would joke about things, but somewhere he still trusted me with the most complicated of the work. And he wouldn't give me the run of the mill work. He would always give me something which, just makes me think, makes me apply my mind, or, something which I come up with something new. And so
which ironically, that's easier for us to do the more complicated thing because it's more stimulating. Yeah.
Yeah. And so he would just see that, in India I used to dance, and I used to dance like on a Monday and a Thursday. And he used to allow me that because after dance, I used to come back to office, work all night. In the morning, take a shower and change from there and go to court again without sleeping. And he didn't understand how this thing happened. So he was like, sort of, what, do you take any drugs or something? I was like, no. Then it was like, he used to tell me that, okay, you delay things. So I used to tell him, I used to always challenge, tell me one instance where I have delayed. And it wasn't delay, it was just the last minute. So he used to always say that, okay, why this last minute thing? You could just imagine that the deadline is a day before or a few hours before. And that never worked. I always tried that, but it kept happening that, and then he was like, you're just lucky that nothing goes wrong at the last minute and just executed fine. But I was actually somewhere lucky that, I just finished things, but at the last minute. But at the same time, he would trust me that at the last minute, he would do it and do it better than most. So, I mean, that really worked sometimes. But it's a scary thought that what if at the last minute something happens? So
absolutely. And I think that's really great to have people that are so accommodating, not just for like specifically ADHD or autism, but just in general, trying to adapt to the people that you're working with, I think is always a good idea. And people will often make statements like, hey, I work best in the morning, so can we do this in the morning? And also I think studies have shown that accommodations that help ADHD people actually help everyone. So that would be, in general, a good practice to do. If these things help everyone, why aren't we doing them already?
Yeah, but I could imagine, so, a person with someone else, I would have been really disadvantaged. So it was just luck that I just happened to be this person. Yeah, sorry.
Thank you so much for listening. If you're interested in joining the next online meetup, let me know on Instagram at Sophia_Rolston. And hey, don't forget to like and subscribe. See you next time.